I think I'm going to give a short lecture in basics of intensive care because when I'm asked to talk about fluids, we are talking about basics. Well, let's see. This presentation is because of an unrestricted educational grant of Baxter. That's my disclosure, no further things to mention. This is where Dutch people are well famous of. We can be proud of a system to prevent this. This was in 1953. And while almost 2/3 of our country is below sea level, so we know something about fluid management, you can say, because after 1953, this has not happened anymore. And that's because of this. This is water management in the Netherlands. This is at the same location as the picture was taken in the last sheet. Okay. I think I should start with the question, what fluid should we use? When our total body water is in the male formula 0.6 times the body weight, we can see this kind of picture where intracellular water is about 60% and the rest is extracellular water, and we can paint it below in 75% interstitial and a part of it in plasma volume. Okay, so when it's about fluids, what should we choose? When we, for instance, choose for glucose 5%, then this will, for 600 milliliters, go to the intercellular water space, where we certainly do not want to have fluids extra. Cells will explode and will die. 300 of this is going to the interstitial space, where we will get edema, and that's also not what we want. I will come back to that. Only 100 cc of this 1 liter comes into the plasma volume. So this is a very poor fluid for fluid resuscitation. We all know we do use it for cases of hypernatremia, but it is, of course, not for fluid resuscitation. Then we say, well, let's use physiologic saline. Well, what is doing the physiologic saline is very nice because this is not going into the intracellular space. That's nice. But it's for 750 milliliters going into the interstitial space, which means that when I give a patient 1 liter of saline, 3/4 of that is appearing in the interstitial space. And we call this physiological fluid. I think it isn't. And therefore, we invented a fluid that is going into the plasma volume. And you see there is even fluids withdrawn from the intracellular water space and from the interstitial space. And these two fluids come with the liter you infuse to 1,250 milliliters in the plasma volume. But we have a problem with colloids. We have, in 2012, we have 2 important publications that say that in very ill patients, so critically ill patients, this will lead to acute kidney injury, so we don't use colloids. That is to say, we don't use the colloids that are formed of, for example, high carbon constitution, because we can use, of course, the classical albumin. But that has, of course, the disadvantage that albumin is a human product, so you can respond allergic to it. That's the one thing, and the other thing, it's expensive. But so colloids are not very well popular in real critical care patients. So, when we talk about fluid overload, then we can talk about, is this pathophysiology or is this cosmetics? Well, for a long time this has been said that it is just cosmetics. Even by very famous physiologists, they said it was just a cosmetic problem, but it isn't. We have the Alsus publication in Chest 17 years ago. It was the first publication that told us that fluid overload is serious pathophysiology and not just a minor detail of cosmetics. And well, if tissues get swollen, oxygen needs to be transported a longer way than in normal tissues, and so this leads to impairment of tissue oxygenation. Lipovsky showed that in 1999 already. So we should have known this for the past 17 years. And an impairment of tissue oxygenation is basically called shock, of course. And for the trainees that are in my audience, it is important to know that this is really important for survival in patients with septic shock. And for the same trainees, I should say, why do we need oxygen? And this is a very, well, simple question, but in intensivists, I asked this question in an audience of 300 intensivists, and only 60% of them gave the right answer. And I was very sad after that, because how can that occur? Well, I will tell you why we need oxygen, and then I will tell you in the manner you will never forget it forever. It is because we are reverse flowers, and I will tell you why. Here is a flower. What does this flower need? It needs water, okay? It needs sunlight. And then 4% of the intensivists said, yes, and it needs oxygen. Alas, that's not the fact. These biological creatures make oxygen for us. So this little cloud is not oxygen, it's CO2. So then we have a little back to basics, chemistry. Water plus CO2 plus light gives what? Well, this flower is going to grow and it makes oxygen for us. The flower is made of carbohydrates, so this is glucose and oxygen. So this is the way the flower makes this. We are humans and we do it the other way around. So we are reversed flowers. We burn glucose with oxygen and then we produce water. We pee this out, then we produce CO2, we breathe this out, and then we give light. No, we don't give light, we make energy. This energy is called ATP, and it's important for you to know that when we use oxygen, and that's the most important thing to know about oxygen, is that we get 36 ATP molecules for every mole of glucose. But without oxygen, it's just only 2 ATPs, and we have a little present. This present is called lactate. And lactate makes our pH going down, and the first organ that is immediately suffering from lowering pH is our heart. Okay, well. So we need to avoid fluid overload. We don't, well, we can think about therapies for it, but we should avoid it first of all. So we need proper techniques to determine fluid responsiveness, like pulse pressure variation, use of PICO, where the intrathecal blood volume index and the extravascular lung water index can help us in our fluid restriction. Or we can use echocardiography, but please don't use the diameter of the caval vein, because many people do this and it is already obsolete. or even good old Swan-Ganz. It's not a problem to use that. You can see responsiveness on cardiac output, and that is okay. So try to predict fluid responsiveness, and then don't give fluids just blindly. So if there is already fluid overload, what to do then? Well, then give furosemide. And if not effective, try the Manu Melbrain's PAL. Are you familiar with the Manu Melbrain's PAL? That is, PAL is PEEP plus albumin plus Lasix. Is that working? Yes, that's working. And the PEEP factor is important, especially for him, because he is in intra-abdominal hypertension issues, which is a special hobby of him, and he says this is the most important rule to remember. Well, probably he's right, but this is when the kidneys do work. So what to do when there is already acute kidney injury? Now we can't use this strategy, so then we start renal replacement therapy. And on CVVH, we can withdraw fluids, or better, we don't give all the fluids back. We always talk about withdrawal of fluids, but we don't withdraw any fluids. We just don't give them back in the substitution fluids. So in the same time, we can correct minerals, and we can go up to 250 milliliters of fluid withdrawal an hour. So we always get a negative fluid balance in several liters a day. This is important because it works, and we don't have the concomitant mineral problems that occur when we do this with furosemide. But we need renal replacement therapy for that, okay? This is a septic shock example. This man is on admission, 142 kilograms. His normal weight is 70 kilograms. So there is 72 liters of fluid overload. This man has a malaria falciparum septic shock with a parasitemia of more than 20%. That doesn't occur very often, but, well, for that we are an academic hospital, of course. After putting this man on CVVH, you can see how he is getting his normal proportions back. And when he was in rehabilitation, he sent me this picture when I asked him to, and so of course he's fine with showing you these pictures, and this is how his face was afterwards. 72 kilograms of fluid. And we really tried to explain this fluid overload as a normal therapy. I can assure you it is not normal therapy. Well, how do we do that withdrawal of fluids in CVVH? We can just set a number in the display, but sometimes when we see the filter will die within a few hours, and that is because when we have a high rate of fluid withdrawal, this shortens the filter survival. So a simple measure is to attenuate the flow, for example, from 200 mils a minute to 150 mils a minute. Then, of course, the efficiency of dialysis is going down, but that's not a problem if we have the first issue, that is fluid overload. So we just do that. Is this complicated? No. But there are several other problems in septic shock we have to deal with. For example, the coagulation problems. That can be a problem in the situation of CVVH, because we need to have coagulation therapy in CVVH for the external circuit. How do we solve this? This is very easy. We solve this by citrate dialysis, and this is working very perfect. So we can do it in the same machine, not a problem at all, and even when there is some impairment of liver function, where citrate toxicity is a problem, it is not a restrictive issue. There is another nice thing. When we have concomitant high levels of PaCO2 in these patients, because there is fluid overload in the lungs, we can of course use our good old permissive hypercapnia, which was first written by Hickling, but this will result in a low pH, and so it will compromise cardiac function. We don't like that, so in high PCO2 levels, we can use the Prismalung to lower down our PCO2, and we can just elevate then the pH to acceptable values. This is written about in 2016 and 2017. And this can be performed just without any problem with CVVH or without the CVVH. And this is very easy, and therefore we need the Prismalung. What is very important, again, basic intensive care, is that we have a long protective strategy then, because we can use a smaller tidal volume and lower plateau pressures. And this is how it works. It is very simple. Probably you know the machine, the Prismaflex lung. This is the Prismalung. It will be placed at the side of the Prismaflex, just over there. We connect the two lines. We connect oxygen, and then it's finished. So this means that fluid overload can be accompanied by some other very nice measures in dealing with the problems of patients in septic shock. And so, to conclude, fluid overload is pathophysiology, not just cosmetics, which is a very important rule. It should be avoided in the first place, and therefore we can manage it with PAL in working kidneys, or we can manage it with CVVH in kidneys that do not work anymore. And we can even combine this with the extracorporeal CO2 removal. So I think this is all basic intensive care, and we should all be very cautious with fluid overload, because it is not making our patients better, it's making them worse. Worse than being longer on the ventilator, longer in the intensive care, and the mortality is higher. So we should take this in account very strongly.